Hello, I am Matt Line. I'm alive, and I care about the world. Therefore, I involve myself in politics. And I'm here to answer the question, why do Americans find communism so unacceptable as a concept when it corresponds to heaven on earth? Think about it. Everybody is equal. No need for money. You get whatever you need. You do whatever you want, etc. I'm going to go into a few examples of implementation in order to illustrate both the inadequacy and naivety of the concept of communism, as well as the evils incurred by the pursuit of communism. In that regard, I'm going a bit beyond merely answering the question to hopefully demonstrate why many of us despise even the word communism on a gut level. To begin with, everybody is equal. Yes, everybody is equal in the sense that within the communist framework, everybody has an equal right to everything. In order to explore what this means, let's take as a counterexample the Amish. The Amish and Mennonite systems, based mostly in Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Ontario, Canada, are communitarian and have existed stably since 1693. I'm going to highlight three striking differences between the communitarianism in opposition to the individualism of the Amish and the ideal of communism that I hope will shed some light on the subject of why many Americans find communism reprehensible as a concept. So communitarianism is very different than communism. First off, we'll discuss private property rights. The Amish have private property rights. Those following the tenets of communism do not. The Amish hold Luther's German translation of the Bible as sacred, and, as many Christians do, strongly emphasize obedience of the Ten Commandments. Luther's Bible clearly states in the second book of Moses, chapter 20, verse 15, Du sollst nicht stehlen. In the KJV, this is Exodus chapter 20, verse 15, and it translates to Thou shalt not steal. So a mandate against theft presumes private property rights as being a basic, self-evident axiom of life. While there are limits to what you can do with your property and still remain Amish, and though the Amish are very charitable, there is still a basic understanding amongst them that what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. This stands in stark contrast to communism, in which everything under it is understood to be public property. Let's imagine a little scenario in order to explore the ramifications of such a system. Remember, communism is both collectivistic and technically free of government. So how does it play out if in our lovely communist society you're sound asleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, in a warm bed that happens to be public property, in a lovely house that happens to be public property? You have the doors locked. Why that is a mystery, because there is no state to apportion the house to your use. And you wake up to the sound of horrible me breaking down the public front door. You slip on the public rug in the hallway, and fall down the public stairs only to find me eating public prunes from the pantry and drinking public Coke Zero from the public refrigerator. I point the public gun that I made in the public machine shop yesterday on public time filled with public ammunition that I made in a hidey hole that I dare call mine. I tell you in no uncertain terms that since your bed is public property, you have no right to keep me away from it, as I need a place to sleep tonight. Now, we're all going upstairs, and I'm safe and snug in bed right between your wife and you. I could continue this even more egregiously by graphically bringing up the ramifications of a lack of individual sovereignty in a communist society, but I'll refrain from doing so in this bullet point. The fact of the matter is that in communism, everyone has use of public property, and everyone is, paradoxically, a public slave. Point 2. Theocracy. The Amish, unlike many other churches after the Reformation, never did away with theocracy. However, participation therein is entirely voluntaristic. There is no central orthodoxy as many other denominations might have, though they have a very strong conservative, traditional bent and exist under a bishop, the preachers, Amish preachers, and to a lesser extent the deacons, have a disproportionately large say in the lives of the Amish compared to other churches found in the USA. So, Amish pastors, Amish preachers are playing a very integral role in the Amish community. And in the lives of ordinary Christian Americans, you don't see that same kind of an impact. You don't see their own pastor having that kind of an impact. But this manifests itself in that if a pastor tells an Amish that growing his business to net $500,000 a year is enough, and this has been known to happen quite regularly, this Amish businessman is not going to be growing his business any further. Though it's not implemented on a state level, theocratic communitarianism stands in stark contrast with the laissez-faire economic policy often associated with pure capitalism. Under communism, there is no state, and there is, by corollary, no religion, except for communism. Along the same lines of what we've already explored in Part 1, due to everything being public property and there being no universally applicable rules on the apportioning thereof, people will fight over what exists and not make anything, because it will merely be taken by those who don't make anything. There is no central plan, a la USSR. There is no money, and there is no guarantee that you even get to keep what you make. This means that basic ideas that are intuitively grasped by almost anyone, supply, demand, and making deals, are artificially removed. If they're reinserted, it's no longer communism. To many Americans, this sounds like a recipe for mass starvation, mass homelessness, and certain death for anyone that hasn't gone and formed a well-armed agrarian community and extended the proverbial middle finger to the systemic lack of a system that somehow got magically implemented during this thought experiment. Point 3. Patriarchy. The Amish form a patriarchal society that is largely agrarian in nature, though there are many skilled tradesmen and other sorts of Amish entrepreneurs. As discussed earlier, this is all done in a communitarian setting. In addition to theocracy, patriarchy is yet another way that communitarianism is enforced. Similarly to how an Amish businessman will listen if a preacher or deacon approaches him and tells him to not grow his business past the point of netting 500K per year, brothers will listen if their father tells them to do something. The older brothers will take care of the younger ones at their own expense, just because they believe it is right, and they'll be ostracized if they don't. The men will take care of the women at their own expense, just because they believe it is right, and will be ostracized if they don't. Those with means will take care of the destitute at their own expense, just because they believe it is right, and they'll be ostracized if they don't. The destitute will work themselves to the bone rather than go into debt, just because they believe it is right, and will be ostracized if they don't maintain the appropriate attitude. There's a strong sense of belonging and hierarchical element holding the Amish happenings and the Amish community together. In a perfectly communistic situation, this would not occur. Footnote: in communism, all are subject to the will of the collective, because no one has any individual rights. The only way this works is if there is somehow a hive mind where the only agent is the collective. If we are communist, you have no agency, meaning you have no choice. I have no agency. I have no choice. No one has any choice. No one has any freedom, as the entire system breaks down once we start to fight over scarce resources. This fighting occurs because of a disagreement on how things should be apportioned. The only way this hive mind actually works is if we revert back to totalitarianism. And there's a very good joke put together by Soviets on that matter. So Stalin is dead, and things have begun to lighten up a bit, relatively speaking. An old couple live in an apartment in Moscow, and she sends him down to buy some meat for supper. After queuing for the obligatory 3 hours, he gets to the counter, and the woman says, "No more meat. Meat finished." He cracks and starts raving. "I fought in the revolution. I fought for Lenin in the First World War and for Stalin in the Second World War, and we're still in this shit?" One of the leather-jacketed brigade takes him on one side and says, "Look, old man, you know you can't talk like this. Just think. A few years ago, you would have been shot for saying these things." The old man trudges home. His wife, seeing him empty-handed, says, "Run out of meat again, have they?" He says, "It's worse than that. They've run out of bullets." See, it takes lead. It takes the currency of lead to enforce communism. I will say again, if private property and a consistently implementable means of ensuring basic human rights are lacking, the only currency will be lead, because no one wants to be a public slave. At the very least, private slaveholders have an incentive to keep their slaves alive and healthy, because although the individual sovereignty in a slave state is grossly flawed, there is at least some attempt at recognizing it and respecting humanity, if only for the sake of profit. Public slaves are completely expendable because the human rights violation is total. Many Americans find communism unacceptable because they see it for what it is: a gross violation of the self-evident human right to life, liberty, and property. The implementation of communism runs in stark contrast to human nature, and every single time steps have been taken to attempt it, it has led to mass murder. The concept sounds nice, but due to its very nature, it is completely untenable. There is no such thing as unlimited rights for everyone, because, as is often quoted, my right to swing my fist ends right where your nose begins. If that is not the case, which is the inevitable consequence of accurate implementation of the tenets of communism on any large scale, then inevitably some SOB is going to violate the rights of others. One human rights violation leads to another, and the whole situation quickly escalates to this. You can see the hanging of political dissidents. You can see purges. You can see mass graves. The thing that many Americans have a problem with is that the concept of communism is nothing more than a naive, infantile dream, the pursuit of which leads to consistent, replicable evil everywhere it is tried. There's a very nice video available on YouTube. If you go and you search for communism throughout the world, you can go and find it. I disagree with the labeling, though, because communism technically has never been fully achieved at a large scale because all humankind has ever managed to achieve in that general direction, by definition, is widespread totalitarian socialism, which leads to the point that communism is a dream. Communism is a dream. The real world doesn't work that way. If the implementation of communism results in throwing children into gulags, I want nothing to do with it, no matter how noble, how high, how wonderful the cause may sound.